With only about 11 gallons of usable fuel in each tank in a Cessna 150, range is limited. On a long cross-country flight, a pilot stopped for fuel, topped it off for the next leg. But a while after takeoff, his RPMs slowed to the point that he had to make an off-airport landing on the long driveway of a Texas farm. The farmer let him spend the night in his guest house, and the next morning they found the issue. What was it? We'll find out on this episode of The Reider Report. Hello everyone, I'm Rob Reider, and welcome to episode 5 of Av Brief's Reider Report podcast, brought to you by Avemco Insurance. CFI and former Beech Aircraft President Randy Groom joins me today to share the story of what happened to the Cessna 150 he was flying and another incident in a Bonanza when the oil pressure dropped suddenly and the engine, in his words, blew up. The lessons learned from each of these stories should help us focus our attention on the pre-flight and how we respond when things don't go as planned. Randy will give us the specifics right after this message from Avemco. According to Avemco claims data, 34% of accidents happen on landing. Does this number surprise you? Avemco Insurance Company values safety and believes strongly in continuous pilot training and education to help prevent these accidents and promote safer skies for everyone. That's why they sponsor the Fast Team Wings program and the Reider Report podcast. Avemco rewards safer pilots with premium credits through their Safety Rewards program. Earn an automatic 5% off by mentioning you're a Reider Report listener. Call 800-353-9089 for a free quote or visit avemco.com/riderreport today. Premium credits are subject to underwriting guidelines, including Avemco recognized training and memberships. Now, the Reider Report. Randy Groom is my guest on the program today, and he's got a couple of great stories for us, and I'm glad you reached out, and I'm glad we've connected. Randy, welcome to the program.
Well, it's great to be here. I appreciate the invitation, and I do have a couple stories to tell.
I know that I want to get to these stories pretty quickly, but you do have an extremely wide and deep involvement in the aviation industry with a number of different companies, and I'd love to hear how you got started in aviation and how you moved through your aviation journey to get where you are today.
Well, I grew up around airplanes for start. My father was a pilot, owned Cessna 140, Cessna 170, and three Beech Bonanzas over the years. So I grew up around airplanes. I wouldn't say I was really hooked on them in particular, but because it was just part of my life and no big deal. But then later, when I was in high school, I think I was a junior in high school, my brother became a flight instructor. He went to college at Oklahoma State University, got his commercial CFI. He became my flight instructor. And so I was his first guinea pig as a student. And actually, I did think it was kind of cool, and I also thought maybe it would impress the girls too. You know, here I am in high school and learning to fly.
Cool.
So I'd say that was the start of it.
Let me ask you this, Randy. Was your brother a good instructor in your estimation then, and looking back now, did you consider him to be a good instructor, or was he just a big brother who was a pain in the butt?
No, he was a good instructor. I think every new instructor is still learning when you get down to it.
Sure.
So he was new at it, but he was good and patient with me. And so anyway, I finished up when I was 17 years old, got my private. Then I went on to Oklahoma State University, and over the years I got my commercial, my CFI. I was a flight instructor in Stillwater, Oklahoma. Charter pilot there. And by the time I finished, I went on to graduate school there. And by the time I finished an MBA, I probably had 2,500 hours.
Wow.
And I thought, well, maybe I've got this business background and I've got quite a bit of aviation experience. Maybe it'd be good to go to work for one of the manufacturers. And I sent a letter to Cessna Aircraft, to Beech Aircraft, and to Piper, the quote, the big three at that time. And both Cessna and Beech interviewed me, and I briefly worked for Cessna. I kind of wanted to go to work for Beech because my father had a Bonanza, and he said, "Oh, you ought to go to work for Beech." And so I worked at Cessna for a little under a year, went to work for Beech, and altogether spent 27 years in the Beech organization, both in Wichita, and then I ran a Beechcraft dealership for many years in North Carolina. Piedmont Aviation was a very large Beechcraft dealer, and we built that business up quite a bit. We were a top performing dealer for many successive years. And I guess the folks back in Wichita thought I might have some secret sauce because we were selling the fire out of a lot of airplanes. So I got recruited to go back as president of Beech, which was a tremendous honor for me.
A tremendous honor indeed. With the heritage of the Bonanza and the Twin Beech, both in civilian and military life, there were how many? Around 9,000 Twin Beeches built in a little over 30 years, as I recall. Wow, you must have been proud as can be.
Yes, but one of the greatest privileges I felt is I went to work at Beech in 1980, and the old guard was still there, including Olive Ann Beech.
Oh, I was going to ask if she was still around. Oh, my goodness,
still there.
You knew the lady?
Absolutely, and it was a very buttoned-up organization back then. I mean, it was a coat and tie environment. And when my first day on the job, in my little cubicle that I had, I was a marketing assistant manager there. But the first day on the job, they said, "Okay, when you go to the restroom, you have to walk by Mrs. Beech's office. And you make sure, you can take your coat off when you're sitting in your cubicle, but when you walk by Mrs. Beech's office, you make sure you put on your jacket."
No kidding.
Yeah.
The dress code was serious for Olive Ann Beech.
It was very serious, but it was great. So I think she and Frank Hedrick and Ed Burns, the old guard from the years before, they ended up moving on around 1983 or so. But it was great. It was a great time. The company, it felt like a family. It really was a wonderful organization, and I was just like working in a big toy store. Got to fly all of the airplanes, and I was flying back and forth to the East Coast, working with dealers, and building up a lot of time and a lot of experience, and I loved it. But then I got recruited to go work for the Beech dealer, Piedmont.
Well, before you get to that, I have to ask the one big question. And there are only, I think, 2 of them flying in the world anymore. What about the Beech Starship?
Oh, I've got about 50 hours in the Starship.
Wow. Was it fun to fly?
Well, you felt like an astronaut. It was a big ego trip to fly. I will admit, some people will argue with me. It was not a particularly great flying airplane. It was hard to land. It had a very high approach speed, like 120 knots.
Whoa.
And it was a beautiful airplane, but not a great airplane. Needless to say, the market spoke, and the market didn't accept it. But I did feel pretty cool flying it.
I bet. Okay, after Beechcraft, I've been interrupting enough, and we're talking. There's so much we could spend 3/4 of an hour just going stuff after Beech.
Yeah, we got to get to my stories.
Right. What came after Beechcraft, and then we'll get into the stories pretty quickly.
So I did. I'll be brief. I went to work for the Beech dealer, Piedmont Aviation in North Carolina, which also had a wonderful feel to it. Almost felt like a family.
And I know you spent some time at Piper as well, but let's talk Cessna now, because the Cessna 150 is the aircraft in which your first story took place. Set us up. When was it? What happened in that 150?
So this was about 1973, and my girlfriend Lynn and I flew this 150 out to Durango, Colorado, which you think about it, that's some high elevation stuff and 100 horsepower. But I had a lot of respect for dead sea altitude, and we were skinnier back then too, so that helped. But we spent about a week backpacking and hiking around that part of Colorado. But then it was time to go back to school, go back to Oklahoma State University. And so we took off from Durango and decided to make a fuel stop in Las Vegas, New Mexico. A lot of people don't realize that there's a town called Las Vegas in New Mexico. It's a really nice town if anybody ever stops there. I do recommend it.
But there's no casino or strip.
No, there's nothing to do with that sort of thing. It's just a beautiful old, almost has a cowtown feel to it. But actually, the Santa Fe Trail went through Las Vegas. It was cool. It's historic. But anyway, we just had a quick turn there, just in and out. We had to get back to school, and took off east to go towards the Texas Panhandle, and then on to Oklahoma. We were planning to stop in Dalhart, Texas, which is in the Panhandle. Anyway, about the time that we crossed the Texas line, I started noticing my RPM slowly going down, and I'm kind of curious, and I checked my mags and carb heat. The carb heat was interesting because it seemed to help a little bit, but anyway, my power just continues to decline and decline and decline to where we couldn't hold altitude.
That was going to be my next question. At what point did you start to lose altitude, and how high were you at that point?
I think at that time, this ground elevation there is at that part of Texas is, I think, about 3,500 feet, 4,000 feet. And we were probably flying at 6,500, maybe, we were probably just 3,000 AGL. And we can't hold altitude. And I'm starting to look for pastures. Lynn's saying, "Are we going to be okay? What's going on?" And I'm sure she could see a little perspiration. And it's getting dark, starting to get dark. And but I guess the good thing is if you're going to have an engine problem, the Texas Panhandle is a pretty good place to do it because it's pretty flat.
that in Kansas.
That in Kansas. But anyway, we're coming down, I'm looking for pastures, and then I just spot in the distance this long driveway leading up to a ranch house. And I said, I think I can land on this driveway. It was a long, straight driveway. And we, sure enough, had enough power to just get in there. We land.
Did you fly a pattern and go straight in?
Oh, no pattern. Just a straight in.
So you really didn't know how long it was?
No, I didn't. But it looked long enough.
Okay.
It looked long enough. There was no pattern. I didn't have the room to have a pattern. So, I went from being stressed about the engine issue to now, okay, we're going to roll up to a ranch house, and am I going to be greeted by the front end of a shotgun? Yeah. What is this all about? So, sure enough, I shut the engine off, what was left of it, and out comes the rancher, and he says, "Evening, what's up?" And very casual. And I explained, I said, "Look, I apologize for the surprise," explained what was going on. And he said, "I'll tell you what, it's getting dark. We don't have time to fool with this tonight. We'll figure it out tomorrow." He said, "There's a bunkhouse in the back and dinner's at 7.
Come on.
And so we went and joined him and his wife for a lovely dinner. They really made us feel at home. And then the next day we get up a lot, and he gets up crack of dawn, and we go out to the airplane to try to figure out what had happened. And the first thing I did do at that point is I took my little fuel drain sump, and I sumped the left tank, and out comes a ton of water and this sort of rusty, mucky substance. A lot.
Kind of a sludge, huh?
Kind of a sludge. And then went around to the other side, had the same thing, and I realized my little fuel sump thing wasn't going to be enough, so the the rancher went and got me about a couple of quart jars, and we filled those up.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, we filled those up. And
Now, wait, now I got to remember here, I don't recall how many gallons usable in one fuel tank in a 150. It's only about 12 or 13 gallons, isn't it?
Usable fuels 22.5, 22 and a half total.
Oh, total. So it's okay. So one wing is down there around 11. So
yeah, right about 11, 12 gallons. Yeah.
Well, ultimately, how much junk, water and sludge came out of those tanks?
We probably took out 2 or 3 quarts of water and sludge. And then it started to press clean, and we started shaking the wings to try to get everything kind of settled out. Then I got some tools and the cowling, got underneath the cowling, got into the fuel gascolator, cleaned that up. We got it to where we weren't detecting any more contamination, and said, okay, well, let's fire it up.
So
fired it up.
You're sitting there with the brakes. You're fired up. The cowling's off the thing. Lynn's standing off to the side praying or something like that.
Yeah.
And did it feel good?
It felt fine.
Did you do a full run-up?
I did a full run-up. I did a full power run-up.
Wow.
And it seemed to run fine. And so we shut down, cowled it up. I said, I'm going to do a test flight alone. Lynn's staying on the ground. I promise I'll come back and get you. and so I did that. It flew fine. And we said our goodbyes to the rancher, took off for Dalhart, Texas.
On the same driveway, just turned it around the other way?
Same driveway.
Oh, my goodness.
Took off. It was an event. But so we get to Dalhart, which at that time had a flight service station. Flight service station. And, we don't have those anymore.
No, we don't. And I remember going into them at Cincinnati Lunken when I was a student and feeling very intimidated, actually.
Yeah. So I go there and, they're part of the FAA, and I reported what had happened, and they got on the phone and they called the FBO in Las Vegas, New Mexico, and told them. They put me on the phone with the owner of the FBO, and I explained, and he said, oh, I guess I know what happened. He said, I just bought this used fuel truck from California, and it had been sitting for about 10 years, and I guess I didn't flush it out completely enough, and I flushed it into your airplane.
I'm impressed that he owned up to his mistake. Well, I know there are lessons to be learned from that flight, and we'll review them in a little while. But before we do that, I'd like to move on to your second story, and that one involves a Beechcraft Bonanza.
Yeah, this is a dozen years more or less later, and as I mentioned, I was a new sales guy for Piedmont Aviation, and I had just been with Piedmont as a young sales guy, only maybe 6 months, and I really wanted to make a sale, and there was a used aircraft manager, and he bought a used Bonanza A36, beautiful airplane. Probably at that time it was, I don't know what year model it was, probably a late 70s model A36, but looked pretty good. And I grabbed it before the other salesman could get a hold of it and took it to do some demos down in the southern low country of South Carolina. And Beaufort, South Carolina, to be exact.
Yeah, that's where the Marine Corps Air Station is there.
Exactly.
One of the biggest runways I've ever landed on.
Yeah, well, I was at the Beaufort County Airport, also known as Frogmore International. But doing these demos, and it's very swampy down there, too, if you recall.
Yes.
But anyway, did a number of demos, spent the better part of the day, and then headed back home to Winston-Salem. And I'm cruising, I was probably at first, when the first detected a problem, maybe 15 miles from Winston-Salem, my home airport. And I had already started descending somewhat. I was probably only, 2,500 AGL right then. And I smelled something. And I said, what is that smell? I know that smell. It's a very familiar smell. Back then, I was kind of thrifty. I used to change the oil in my car myself all the time. So I got to know the smell of hot oil. And I said, oh, I think that's oil. And then I look at my oil pressure gauge, and it says 0.
Already.
And so I thought, the engine's still running. So, and the nearest airport behind me is 10 or 15 miles. My home airport's now about 10 miles ahead. I can't glide that far. I said, I think what I'll do is climb. The only thing I think I want to do right now is climb so that when this engine does let go, at least I've got the most to work with.
We have said for a long time there's nothing worse than altitude above you, right?
Right.
Runway behind you and fuel in the truck. So we're going 2 out of 3 on this one, but you're going for altitude. You were able to get some altitude before. Well, I'm sure you assumed the engine was going to seize up.
I was pretty certain it was going to seize at some point pretty soon, because I'm not seeing partial oil pressure. I'm seeing 0.
Wow.
And I'm confident at this point it is not an indication problem. It is a real problem. And I radioed to Greensboro Approach, which is the local approach control, and I told them what's going on, and that I was at, I think I said like about 3,000 MSL, and I climbed up to about 6,000 MSL. And Greensboro said, okay, well, would you like to declare an emergency? And back then I'm thinking, oh, emergency, paperwork, it's going to be different. And I said, no, I'm not going to declare an emergency. But I would like to go to my home airport direct. And they said, okay, so cleared direct. And then the engine started to surge, and then it exploded, literally exploded. A loud bang, smoke pouring out of the front. And I couldn't even see out of the windscreen for a period.
Is that because of the amount of oil that had just accumulated, or was it the smoke?
It was hot gases mainly, and most of the oil was gone. So, because I think the oil mainly went down on the belly and below, but this was mainly just smoke, hot gases coming out of the engine. And it was a loud bang, and then the prop immediately seized, and it was still in a very flat pitch, which is not ideal for gliding, actually.
It certainly is not.
So it was funny. Right about then, Greensboro Approach said, well, would you turn right to 010 for traffic? I said, no, I cannot turn for traffic. I need to go direct to Winston-Salem because I've lost my engine.
And you still have not declared an emergency?
No, I had not.
This is an audio-only podcast, but you and I had the Vulcan mind meld looking at each other here on Riverside FM.
I think you know what's going to be the moral of this story when it's over.
We'll get to that.
We'll get to that. But anyway, I'm coming down, and I'm coming down pretty quickly.
About what rate of descent was it? Were you at 1,000 feet a minute, or were you able to stretch it to 500? And what's the best glide speed in that A36? Did you know the numbers for it?
Yeah, it's about 105.
Okay.
105 knots. And it was different because your normal glide speed is with a flat stop prop too. So I'm coming down pretty fast. I didn't look at the vertical speed. I don't know. But what I did figure out is I did have, at that point, with the distance I had and the altitude that I'd gained, I could make my airport. I was going to make it. And I shot for the middle of the runway. I remember that from my flight instructing days. If you have an emergency and you have enough runway, shoot for the middle, because you might not give yourself some room in case you come up short. And I'm coming on in, and I waited till I absolutely positively knew I had it. Then I lowered the landing gear. I still had the electrical system to lower the landing gear, and I landed. I rolled off the taxiway, and the tower said they'd already cleared me to land, and then they said, okay, go ahead and taxi to the ramp.
Unable.
Send a tug. So anyway, they contacted my FBO. They sent the tug, and I remember going in to talk to my boss, I go into the FBO. My wife happened to be visiting there. My wife, Becky, we were building a house. We were going to go meet with a contractor. And she said I walked in and I looked white as a ghost.
Oh, boy.
She said I looked drained. And I guess I was. But I go into my boss's office and he's in a meeting, and I said, "Excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to let you know I just had to dead stick a Bonanza in here, our Bonanza, and engine's blown up and it's trash." And he said, "What? What?" It's like not even believing me. And I said, "No, I'm sorry. I just dead stick this airplane in. The engine's trash." So anyway, we went over and surveyed the situation over in the shop, and I still have, one of the mechanics gave me a souvenir because when the engine blew up, it literally started throwing connecting rods through the case.
Oh, boy.
And so I still have a connecting rod souvenir from that event at my hangar today.
Through the case and into the bottom of the cowling and where it rested, I assume.
Yeah, it dented up the cowling. It dented up the cowling. So anyway, I was very, very fortunate. And that's my story.
2 good stories and 2 very good outcomes. Randy, let's take a break and we'll come back and do the lessons learned. We'll be right back. Since 1961, Avemco has been the only aircraft insurance company that lets you speak directly with an aviation underwriter ready to solve problems and approve coverage based on your unique flying situation. Call 800-353-9089 for a free quote, and you'll save an instant 5% for being a Rider Report listener. Save even more for recurrent training, getting a new rating, or participating in a Fast Team Wings course. Call 800-353-9089 or visit avemco.com/Rider Report. Be sure to mention the Rider Report sent you. Premium credits are subject to underwriting guidelines, including Avemco recognized training and memberships. Now, back to the Rider Report. We're back with Randy Groom, who had 2 good outcomes, one in a Cessna 150, one in a Beechcraft Bonanza, an A36, both of which involved some things that were, well, maybe you did some stuff wrong, maybe you didn't, and I know you did some things right, but tell me, Randy, what are the takeaways you have? What's your debrief on the first one with the Cessna 150 and the lady with whom you were traveling?
Well, I think this was obviously clearly a fuel contamination issue of biblical proportions. It was enormous, and I think in my earlier training days, I was always told on a quick turn of fuel, you're unlikely to detect any contamination, to get water or dirt or anything out of a tank.
And that's because?
Because it takes a little while to settle down to the bottom of the tank. Water is, heavier than gas, than avgas. And so I'd sort of been told, you're almost wasting your time to sump your tank with a quick turn. And I think so for me, with regard to that, I believe that actually, had I sumped the tank, I probably would have detected it because it was so much contamination in this case.
Mm-hmm.
But I think maybe the lesson learned is go have an extra cup of coffee. Don't even do a quick turn unless you have to. Have some time for any contamination to settle in so you can detect it. I still, even if I'm just going to a self-serve pump today, and maybe I am very, very focused on sumping my fuel today. I do it all the time, and
I bet you do
to excess, and so I think that's the number one thing. The only other curious thing about that event was I mentioned, I think in our previous conversation, that I noticed when I pulled carburetor heat, it seemed to help a little bit.
Yes, and you did say that.
And I remember, and again, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a mechanic, but I remember hearing along the way somewhere in my training that putting carburetor heat on tends to enrich in the mixture a little bit. And maybe that allowed for a little bit more fuel to get into the engine. I don't really know. Probably one of your listeners will be able to comment on that. But I can say for sure that carburetor heat seemed to help a little bit. It wasn't enough to help me hold altitude. So it's almost nothing whether it was right or wrong. It's just that's sort of a curious little anomaly in that whole situation.
Let me ask you this, Randy. In terms of when you sump, I am assuming, do you have a small round cup or do you have the long cup with a screwdriver on the end?
I have the long cup with a screwdriver.
Okay. When you do that, how many times do you fill that up? And if it's clean, do you dump it back into the top of the fuel tank?
Yes, I do. I only do it. I actually, today when I sump my Bonanza, I'll sump the left tank, probably take an inch and a half out, and then I'll sump the other tank, take an inch and a half out, and then there's the other low spot that you do. You have a little door on the Bonanzas, and you sump the lowest spot in the whole fuel system. And basically, at the end of the day, I fill up the entire long tube, and then if all looks perfect, I dump it back into the tank.
Got it. Good thing to do. Sump and save if you can. Don't have to sling it out over the grass or something like that.
Yeah, and actually, you don't want to do that, especially in Florida. The environmental people will be on you big time.
Gotcha.
So I put, good fuel I put back in the airplane.
I gotcha. Well, let's go to the Bonanza because this was one that was, in both cases, actually, you were in a situation where you couldn't maintain altitude. Tell me a little bit more about what happened in the Bonanza when you were going back into Winston-Salem and the little visual you and I had earlier when we talked about emergencies. What did you learn on that flight?
Well, I think every listener will probably has already immediately picked up I was foolish to turn down declaring an emergency. I mean, what was I thinking? I mean, there was no fire trucks waiting for me, and there probably should have been because I didn't declare an emergency. Declaring an emergency would have given me more priority. I mean, it was so crazy. They even asked me to, after my engine had quit, they asked me to turn right for traffic. And so it was foolish that I didn't declare an emergency. And so I think that's the number one lesson there. If you have a serious problem and think that there could be a really bad, go ahead. It's no big deal. Just declare. And so that's number one. I think climbing was probably the right thing to do. There might be an argument to say, well, but gosh, you maybe shouldn't have climbed because you would have gone faster if you'd have stayed at the altitude where you were. I think climbing was the right thing to do. Maybe your readers or listeners will think differently, but I think it worked out. I got up from, I went from 3,000 to 6,000, engine blew up, and I had the room to make it to the airport. If I hadn't climbed, would I have made it? I don't know, but it made me feel better. It gave me peace of mind to know I at least had the room to maneuver and think about what I needed to do next. And fortunately, I had the room.
I've got a couple of questions to ask you, one of which goes back to your instrument scan when you didn't notice there was a problem until you smelled it, and oil pressure was already at zero. I have spoken with some other folks who in their scan have noticed a little lowering of the oil pressure and have made that part of that scan. Do you now make that part of your scan on a regular basis along with whatever you have for your display, be it a 6-pack or a primary flight display?
Yes, I would say that I do have a more aggressive scan now as a result. In fact, thinking back on it, obviously in some of the modern glass cockpits, if you have low oil pressure, you're going to get more, and you're going to get some enunciation.
Exactly,
from that.
That's true. They're very true.
And so it's going to be in your face in the modern cockpit. But in those days, there is no enunciation. There's no red light that comes on. So,
and it's not one of the big meters.
No, it's not at all. So you do need to have a good regular scan. And I would say today it is more in my scan.
Well, Randy, did you ever figure out what happened to that engine?
Yes. As I mentioned, the engine was trashed. So, why? What happened? What created it? And what it turned out to be, this happened to be an air-conditioned Bonanza. And the air conditioner is driven off of the starter adapter drive that goes into that Continental engine. And what happened was that drive sheared and basically fell out and created just an open canal for all of the oil to come out of the engine, and very quickly.
Oh my gosh.
I think that oil came out of the engine in a matter of less than a minute.
So your scan probably wouldn't have made any difference.
Well, not unless you're scanning every 30 seconds. I think right. it really came out very, very fast. And I can't remember exactly technically what ended up being modified, but an AD, I do recall, came out as a result of my failure. And it was just a big mechanical failure. And I think Continental corrected that problem, and I haven't heard of subsequent problems like that from the air-conditioned Bonanzas. So I was a lucky guy.
You mentioned something earlier about shooting for the center of the runway, and that
right.
of the length of the runway. And I have never heard that in terms of how to handle when you're an engine out situation to do that. Why do you tell your students, and what's the rationale for shooting for the center of the runway?
Well, I think, they came from my flight instructing days, and I taught my students that. I think my brother, when he taught me that, and that is because if you shoot for the middle and you maybe don't quite judge it right, and you end up landing short of that, you're still not going to you'll be better than short of the runway. And the worst is to be landing on runway 33 in Winston-Salem, and there's nothing but big, tall pine trees. So shooting for the middle of the runway gives you margin for a little bit of a misjudgment of your glide. And so that's the whole rationale behind that.
Got it. Well, those are good lessons learned. Randy Groom, thank you for sharing your stories, sharing what you learned, and for being a guest here on the Reider Report.
Well, I love it. I think what you're doing is a great service to the community, and really thank Avemco for sponsoring you. And it's great. Been a privilege to join you, and come down to Florida and visit.
We'll do it. Thanks to all of you for listening, and I'd ask that you tell your friends that we've moved and that we really want them to join us for this new chapter with the same story sharing I've done for the last 5 years, just with a new name. We drop episodes every couple of weeks so you can hear the first-hand accounts of the flying lessons that sometimes only experience can teach. If you've got a story that you'd like to share, here's my new email address, rob@avbrief.com. rob@avbrief.com. The executive producer of the podcast is Russ Niles. The theme and commercial instrumental music for the program was written and performed by Rob Podorf. For Avemco Aviation Insurance and avbrief.com, I'm Rob Reider. Catch you next time on The Reider Report.